This is Margie Russell, Executive Director of NYARM, the New York Association of Realty Managers. And today's webinar, the topic is the necessity to plan well in advance the budgeting and the engineering aspects for capital improvement projects. So the order of today is for the 2021, the year 2021, the capital improvement projects that a building wishes to undergo, the budgeting and the engineering aspect must start now. Engineering has to start first before you can budget. So the summer before any building goes into their budget year, if it starts January 1st, it's the summertime where you need to start the engineering aspect, and then we go into budget season in the fall to have your budget tight and complete by January 1st. So that is the topic for tonight. Each of the panelists will introduce themselves and their company, and then we will go into the individual presentations. But the first introduction is Danny Grossarth with TechDad, Technicity, and Danny, you're on.
Great, thanks Margie, thanks for having me. So my company is called TechDad. The division of the company, TechDad here, the division of the company that mostly deals with buildings as a whole, opposed to an individual client, is called Techmenity. Basically, we offer smart building and smart home integration, IT support, and design services, as well as the training that follows for creating a smart building. Ideally, Margie, you mentioned, getting in as early as possible, budgeting as early as possible is of the utmost importance, which I can agree with, because we, as the technology integrator, we're always brought in at the end, and we always find it either more expensive, impossible, or solutions completely value engineered out that end up being, important inclusions to a building anyway. So if we can work with a developer, landlord, building owner, or operator at the earliest stage of planning, then we can provide the best technology solution and recommendation without going over budget and staying on track and staying focused. Generally, we consider ourselves technology general contractors, so we can help you navigate that.
Okay. Thank you, Danny.
You're welcome.
Bill, you're on
Margie.
for introduction. You're welcome.
Thank you, Margie. Well, I'll keep the introduction short because I can't wait to hear from all of the other esteemed guests, which I'm very privileged to be counted among. My name is Bill Payne. I'm a principal and vice president of ONS Associates. We're an engineering and architecture firm, and this topic is obviously very near and dear to our heart, as we like to help our clients plan all kinds of capital projects, from mechanical, electrical, plumbing, energy, structural, architectural, building envelope, any of your code compliance and parking types of things. And I'm just very grateful to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see. Oh, then we started in alphabetical order. And forgive me, Christina, I left you out of the alphabetical order for introductions.
I'm just here.
No, you're not. You're never just here. So since you're with Bill Payne, ONS Associates, you introduce yourself next.
Hi, I'm Christina. I'm with ONS Associates, engineers and architects. I'm the business development person, so you can call me for any questions that you have, and I can direct you to the right person.
Okay, excellent. All right, so next introduction, we're moving in alphabetical order. Ari.
Thank you, Margie, for having me here today. My name is Avi Zanjirian. I'm from Czarnowski and Beer, a partner. We do a lot of co-op and condo work. We represent about 170 co-ops and condos in New York City. And budgeting is really also near and dear to us as accountants and auditors, and looking forward to sharing some more information as we get through the presentation. Thanks again for having us.
You're welcome. Carmen.
Good afternoon, Margie and panel. My name is Carmen Rainieri. I'm Regional Director with Skanska Building, the SIS group, which is Skanska's Integrated Solutions. We're program managers, owners reps. We typically fly under the radar. People always associate Skanska with the big mega projects, but I'm on the owner side. We do a lot of programs, higher education, healthcare, private condos, so on and so forth. 42 years in the business on the risk side, at risk side, as well as on the owner side. So have a pretty full understanding of the industry of how it works.
Okay. Thank you, Carmen. Jerry.
Thank you, Margie, for having me on this panel. And my name is Jerry Niemeier. I'm currently the Vice President of Co-op and Condo Lending at Loan Depot, a major residential lender. And this is what I've been doing, is the review of co-ops and condos to determine if they're financially viable and demonstrably well run. Been doing this for the last 20 some odd years. And besides that, just to keep myself off the streets, I'm also the board member at WOTC Tenants Corp, a garden-style co-op in Bayside with roughly 40 acres and 900 units. And we do have our share of things that we need to budget for, plan for, both today and into the future.
Thank you, Jerry. And Zaneta.
Hello, everyone. I'm Zaneta Williams. I am actually an NYARM volunteer with Margie. I'm also the CEO of Eyeris Industries, the MWBE organization where we actually deal with mechanical conservation and contractors. In construction and GCs. We are national contractors as well for the federal government and for the state.
Okay. Thank you, Zaneta. And so beginning our presentations, Carmen Rainieri.
Yes.
With Skanska.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my topic today is the importance of a 2-week look ahead or a 3-week look ahead. Try to demystify it for you folks and hopefully give you an additional tool to have in your toolbox. In our industry, we use look ahead schedules regularly, and usually, they're important because what we're doing is we're breaking down the master schedule into little bite-sized morsels so we can monitor the project on a weekly, bi-weekly, typically a 3-week range, so we can plan and monitor the activities as they unfold. It revolves around the construction industry, but it's a very flexible tool that can be used in the condo, the finance industry, because there's so many tasks that you have to go through. And it's sort of like a construction to-do list. And what it does is it really enables you to focus on the things that are at hand and that are important as you move through the process. As you know, everything in construction is very fluid. It depends on the schedule. The schedule is what drives the project. It's what drives the contractors. So we monitor the schedule, and the look ahead is really a valuable tool. On our weekly OAC meetings with the owner, that's one of the first topics we go over with the contractors to make sure that they're hitting their targets. And if they're not, it gives you the ability to adjust. That's the importance of that tool. And it's not so sophisticated that, there's a learning curve. It's really not a learning curve for anyone. It's a simple little spreadsheet that you use. You identify the tools, the activities. What's important, what we do is we tie the activity numbers to the main schedule activity numbers, so everything coincides. the issue is when you're going now important in your planning stages for your capital improvements, there's so many things, so many little projects. So you may have a master schedule or a master to-do list. And then what you're going to do is you're going to break out each one of those little projects and put it in a 3-week look ahead or a 2-week look ahead, because there's certain things that you're going to have to deliver or deliverables that you're going to need to get in order to achieve your end date. And it makes it manageable for people. So even if you're going for financing, if you're planning your budget, you have, there's certain things that you have to do, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. It's a very simple, but it's a very effective way to plan your projects, your budgets. Like I say, it's just basically a to-do list that graphically represents what you need, and you allot time for each activity, whether it's days or hours. Like I said, you can manipulate it in such a way that it's customizable to fit your particular use. That's really all it is in a nutshell.
Carmen, that's really interesting. I'm curious, with all of your experience, when you get a budget or a 2-week look ahead or a schedule, what do you look for to see if it passes the smell test for honesty and integrity, or for well planning? What are the things that you spot right away to know whether this is fiction or true story?
So that's a good question, actually. So with the process of putting a schedule together, or even a look ahead schedule, you're going to run a concurrent risk register, because each activity, each project has amount of risks, things that aren't going to happen, right? Or things that are liable to go off the rails. For instance, in this situation now with the pandemic, one of the biggest risks that are affecting all projects is the delivery, the supply chain, right? Okay, workers are back to work, but the $1,000 question is that HVAC unit going to get here in the 12 weeks that we allotted? Now, when we're now restarting the projects, the first thing we do is we go back, we sit down with the team and the client, and we go through the risk register, because prior to COVID, that risk register was populated with all risks and the time frame associated with those risks. Now we're going to take a look at that same risk register, and we're going to assess it based on the current condition of the supply chains. Also, what's important is with the 2-week look ahead, as you're dealing with subcontractors, is for each activity, you should be associated with a crew size. Obviously, if you want something to get achieved in a week, you're going to have a specific number of craft workers to accomplish that. So not only do you want to monitor the duration of the activity, but you also have to monitor the size of the crew to make sure the contractor is going to achieve his goals. And the whole premise behind it is when you're sitting down on an OAC meeting on a weekly basis, you can call people to task and say, hey, this activity you're scheduled to finish on the 10th. We're sitting here at the 9th. You're still 50% not done. How are you going to finish this in the next day or so? So it gives you an opportunity to monitor the production of your subcontractors. And the most important thing is you need people to buy into the schedule. They have to understand that the schedule is a critical component of the success of the project. To further answer your question, Bill, we look at durations and we look at the logic. And those are important things, right? You want to make sure the duration is a duration that can be met. You look at the crew size, you look at the activity, and then you look at the logic, the predecessor and the successor, to make sure this is pretty much the way it's going to be built. But you do this when we review it. We also review it with all the major contractors and subcontractors that are involved in the project, because without buy-in from your team and everybody associated with the project, all you're really looking at is a piece of paper that's pretty, right? So you really need to get, the rubber where the rubber meets the road. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Good thoughts.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Carmen. And actually, with Carmen's concept, I would just like to add to it. Now expand that 2-week look ahead to a 6-month look ahead, which is what we've got right now with the engineering before the budgeting, before the final budget is delivered no later than January 1st. So the look ahead schedule from a planning standpoint, how important it is for the board to say, well, what is our wish list? Now they have to decide what is their wish list, and then go for the rough budgets. Give me a budget number, before you even come to my building. Then, okay, we put together our wish list, but before 6 weeks are out from now, we must have the beginning of the engineers coming in and starting to do the rough engineering, so you can get a budget number. Again, it doesn't have to be a final budget number, but something that can be approved with the board and so forth before the end of the year, and certainly in the fall. So thinking about the 2-week look ahead, we're now looking at what has to be done with a 6-month planning and budget look ahead.
Well,
so with that, I'm going to.
Oh, I just want to add to that. So what's important, like, you're going to do a major, say, mechanical system upgrade. All right. So you have your master wish list of different projects. Okay. But now this 6-week or 2-week or 3-week look ahead, and you can create the look ahead that fits your requirements. But you need your architect, you need your engineer, you need your MEPs. They all take time and durations, and you need to put that graphically on a piece of paper so you can see what you're going to need before you get to the point where you can even get a budget from your contractors, right? The design work has to be done, but the design work is inherent to a lot of different durations of different subconsultants. Like, you have the architect, you have the mechanical engineer, you have the structural engineer. Everybody has a part to play. And then there's a coordination of those design documents so they can be submitted to a contractor, so a contractor can give you a realistic budget. So the idea is you have a master schedule with different activities, and then the 6-week or whatever duration schedule you want to do look ahead makes you boil it down and bring out specific little pieces, and then you build upon that, right? So we have, building 1, mechanical penthouse, and then you break down that look ahead to say, okay, for the mechanical penthouse, we're going to need, we're going to need an architect, we're going to need a mechanical engineer, structural engineer, we're going to need somebody to do rigging for a crane. All those activities now get listed with a duration, so you know what it's going to take you to accomplish. Because what you have to understand is folks that aren't in our industry or not as knowledgeable of us don't understand the time that's involved in getting a proposal together for a budget on an item, right? They think we wave a magic wand, we call Bill up, hey, Bill, what do you think it's going to cost? Well, what he thinks it's going to cost and what's going to happen once he has a design are two different things. And, unfortunately, people that aren't in our industry don't understand that the time is involved, and then the constraints with that as well, So it's a useful tool, and I think it's something that hopefully the folks that attend this webinar will get some use out of. That's all I have to say. I'm sorry. That's
right. No, Carmen, you expanded that. That was fabulous, and it makes me think about in real time. And so, Jerry, of course, you're going to discuss how the property that you're on the board of is dealing with some of those issues, as well as the financing. Because all this, we haven't even talked about finding the money that's going to spend, to spend on this. But Jerry, I leave this up to you, and it's all yours. Yep. Unmute. Ask to unmute.
Unmuting.
Okay.
Control A or just hit the button. Thank you, Margie. Yes, absolutely. In fact, my time on the board here hasn't been that long, but let me say 2019 was definitely a pivotal year for us to be budgeting for 2020. And so, the things that we're discussing here is pretty much the capital budget. What do you do for those capital needs you have? But first we had to figure out what our operating budget was at. Did we have enough funds to be able to cover the normal operating expenses that we were planning to have? And typically that should be covered within your short-term, within your revenue, your maintenance paid, your other fees that you may collect, whether you're renting units or renting garages or laundry income, you got to take all those things in consideration. And so you hopefully come out with a realistic break-even budget on your operating expense. We're not trying to be making money. But then when it comes to the capital side, we may also have to include a portion of that to fund capital. And so that you got several sources for capital funding of budgets once you determine what the expenses are. One, of course, is the shareholders. Second is try to refinance your underlying mortgage, which may or may not be possible at the time based upon yield maintenance payments or prepayment penalties. Or you may find an additional lender out there to make funds for you available to help fund your projects. So for 2020, what the board was faced is we had boilers, and let me remind everybody that what we're dealing with here is 52 individual buildings, garden style. We got 9 boiler rooms, and we have one problem we don't have. We don't have any elevator problems. That elevator problems are not spoken here, but we got everything else. We have grounds to upkeep. We have basically wooden structures. So we got to make sure the termites are held at bay. And of course we have the boilers as well. And we've had lots of repairs, lots of maintenance. It was time that they be replaced. And so that was in our initial thought plan for the capital budget, that we needed to replace boilers. And also there was a certain amount of funds that need to be set aside for roofs to target for this year. Now, we did not have all the answers when we completed the budget, but we had a rough idea, by the end of 2019, but we had a rough idea of what we needed to do so that we could then, do what Carmen suggested, go out and get your bids. You go to the boiler companies and find out what their stats were, what their specifications were on boilers that they could put in, what the savings would be what the cost would be to replace our 40-year-old boilers with the latest technology. And what we chose to do as the year 2020 went on, we got some details in regards to boilers, and we found that we didn't have enough money within our current reserve fund, so we went to an outside source to do that. Now, it was also helpful. Our co-op was self-managed for the last 22 years, and it was very helpful this year that we had a professional managing agent. We have Greenthal Management / MGRE as our managing agent, and they also picked up a property manager that has been very skilled and experienced in handling boiler replacements and things like that. And I'm glad that he's been on board, and we're progressing forward. So the main thing is we just want to make sure that, one, we had the funds. We could also generate some. Our capital improvements should based upon the specs should be saving us money, which then should be offsetting some of the additional cost we have in terms of funding for the new loan. So that's roughly what I have to say at this moment. Questions?
Okay. Thank you, Jerry. Any thoughts, comments? No? Good? Okay. So let's see. I think we're moving into Avi. Avi, you're next.
Thanks, Margie. So there's two factors we like to, as auditors, a lot of times we're always come to after the fact. We're working on the audit. We'll inquire of what's going on during the course of the year. But again, a lot of our work is done after the year is over. One thing I like to stress to a lot of my clients is that it's a continuous relationship throughout the year. Budget process is one of them, and very important. You don't know how many times that I'll reach out to clients in October and September, previously mentioned by one of the panelists, that's the time you get started to see, what's going on with your operating budget, how are you planning for the future, what's going on in those respects. So it's important. And then, so that's just from an operational standpoint. You're throwing in today with COVID, obviously some issues with certain buildings increasing expenses on that front, delaying projects, because they can't get the workers out to the buildings and to do the work. Obviously takes another element there as well. But in terms of our job as accountants, as advisors, as to tackling these projects and these big capital, either regular repairs of building or big building capital projects, we really like to usually give two pieces of advice there. Number one is that if something's coming, everyone's talking about planning. Planning is the most important part, and you don't want to wait for something to break. You want to be proactive about it. In the budget process, a lot of our buildings will set aside a piece of their budget, especially in condominiums, to set aside about 5-10% to go into reserves to kind of build up their reserve account, because they know in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, I'm going to have to redo the elevator, or we want to redo the elevator, or we know that the roof has a couple of years left in the life, the boiler is going to go, or as Jerry was just saying, we're saving in capital projects because I keep patching up the boiler each year and spending $40,000-$50,000 on that front. Why don't I just replace the boiler? And I've had buildings that have done that and saved their repair supplies and maintenance category, dropped 80 grand because they didn't have to fix the boiler that was old. But again, the idea of planning to get there, because when these projects come, and I'm sure I've only been doing this for 13 years, but for everyone else that's been doing it for longer, will know they always come in bunches. When it rains, it pours. And you don't want to have to go to do an emergency refinancing or to go get a line of, pull on your line of credit. You want to be prepared. And if you have the means of doing so, that's not going to be a burden on the shareholders or the unit owners by either allocating from your budget to reserves each year, or making sure that if their building has a flip tax or transfer fee, that money goes into reserves so it's not used for operations. That will increase your reserve account. So when you get to that project, whether it's 3-4 years down the road, or even 10 years, I have buildings that project out for 10 years, you're not going to the owners and asking for a large assessment or going and pulling down from the line of credit. And those are the things that are important to budget for as you're looking at each year, especially not just on a annual basis, but for a couple of year plan out to the future. Any questions? All right.
The one thing, if I may add, now when I was talking more with my board member hat on, but if I put my lender hat on and we talk about budgets, and Avi mentions it, that with condos and co-ops, with co-ops, we got a little flexibility in terms of taking a look at the financial statements that Avi and his counterparts would produce. We do review them. And we know that with co-ops, we have additional flexibility in obtaining funding and what have you, but we'd still look for a certain amount of financial soundness in their financial statements. They have adequate reserves. They're running net operating, having net operating income rather than net operating losses. But then when it comes to condos, there are specific guidelines that our Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac put out that we look for, and that is that they budget a minimum of 10% for replacement reserves. Now, there's a special formula for the 10%. You're not supposed to double count what you're funding. So it's really like if you had 100,000, you budget 10%, that's 10,000. Well, you can really just say if they budget $9,000, it's 10%. But the point of it is they want to see that in the budget for us to be able to say that whether this condo is financially viable or not. Or what they're looking for is a reserve study. And that's a place where engineering firms can help a great deal, where they can do a reserve study, look at all the major components and saying, well, this has got this amount of life, this has got that amount of life, which is going to be different than what we do in the world of accounting. We have IRS guidelines for depreciation schedule. This is more, what's the physical condition of the roof, what's the physical condition of the boiler, how much longer is it going to last, and how much is it going to cost to replace, and a reserve study can be completed. And if that's funded according to the reserve study, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac are typically happy with that as well. So part of the scheme of budgeting.
Carmen, I'm curious, how does your view of the lending different now that you're a board member?
Me lending now that I'm a board member? Well, I've been a board member pretty quick after I became involved in co-op and condo lending, but it's all melded at this point in time. As I say.
Okay. Yeah, Jerry, if you could expand a little bit when you say you melded. I mean, obviously you've been advising co-op and condo buildings in their financial ability to get loans, but to have it front and center.
Absolutely. And I also bring my accounting background too. I started life out in the world of being a CPA. So I will advise boards or managing agents as to what we're looking for in the lending process, so that they can be sure of obtaining loans from the various lenders, whether it be from me or somebody, some other lender as well, because we're pretty much operating with the same guidelines. Me being both a board member and a lender, yeah, I can also bring that board member into the lending, into my job as a lender, where I understand the challenges that the boards have, and then I can also explain from a lender viewpoint to the board, what the lender's challenges are. So that's where it comes. That's what I bring to it.
Okay. Thank you, Jerry.
Okay.
So, Bill, this has had to bring so much to mind with the beginning, right after the wish list, or even during the wish list, has to be, there's got to be preliminary engineering appearances, because it's not like you're going to design a whole project in August, right? But you're going to come in and talk to a board or a treasurer or who's ever the chairman of the construction committee, and give the big scheme, and then sometime in December or January it will actually be engineered, if not already engineered, to put it out to bid so they can start in March and all this. So either through the buildings that you've had firsthand experience on, or just making you realize, okay, what would I do if I was asked to walk a property with a committee of the board and said, what must you do now? I'm sure all this is on your mind right now.
Oh, you're exactly right, Margie, and I can't help to resonate with everything that's been said so far. When I first started, it was just before a lot of the electronic communication happened, before Cell phones were a permanent fixture on our sides. And one thing that I've noticed change is how people perceive time and schedule. And it used to be that there was a real clear pattern of how, at least in the Northeast, how construction took place, where you would have studies or budgeting, done in the late fall after the construction season ended, so that you could have planning and decisions and consensus for what needed to be done in early winter, so that you could have things designed for bid in early spring when the contractors were really hungry, so the construction could start, the moment weather broke. And then you would have a full construction season, and things generally, went like clockwork. And I'm surprised how more and more and more we're getting requests of an engineer to evaluate a roofing project in August, hoping to have it done by the end of the year. Same thing with boiler projects and so on and so forth. So somewhere along the way, we've lost our sense of planning and timing. So all these things that, really resonate. Lending is a process, right? And Avi said that he's seen a lot of things in the rearview mirror of mistakes that were made in budgeting, and so the best thing to do is to try to get ahead of a lot of those things. And I remember as a kid, the first thing I worked construction. I remember the first thing that the guy telling me was, you measure twice and cut once. Otherwise, you measure once, you end up cutting twice. And there's a lot of waste when you rush and you don't plan. And I never forgot that. There's so many expressions. How time is money. Money is money. And I grew up with the A-Team too, and I always loved it when I love when a plan comes together. And so many times I want to speak all of these references, because I think planning is one of the most important aspects of a project. And so many times, especially with a lot of inexperienced people, and I'm sure Carmen could speak to it, a lot of times schedules and budgets are copied and pasted from another document. Or somebody's email something, and it could be fictitious or it could be wishful, but there it goes. It gets copied and pasted or entered into a cell, and there's no process and no evaluation, and we run full speed ahead into projects that are often, 6 and 7 figures, sometimes more. And I'm sure we've all been to board meetings where they spent 2 hours talking about a $15 parking violation, whether or not you can walk your dog on a certain, grassy lawn, and they've spent all of 15 minutes on some of the most important capital projects. And so I really think that if I could say one thing about the whole planning process, is that it's really, if you look at budgets and schedules, it's not a homework assignment that you just try to get done. It's really a time where you get to collectively get all the experience of people like Avi and Jerry and Carmen, and really understand, like, what is the value of a project? What is the worth of the project? What is the importance of a particular project? And start to work back into those numbers. At this point, all of us have certain intuitions, right? We know what a reserve fund should be in an order of magnitude, right? And if we know that, I think we should be backing into some of those things instead of just carrying forward sometimes numbers that don't make any sense. And so I'm a huge believer in planning things, so you can decide, what is this project actually worth? What do we really want to accomplish? How long should it take? What is it going to take to get us there? And so, those types of studies, and they fall into all types and sizes, is really important. We hear a lot about energy studies now, exterior wall studies, there's parking garage inspections now, there's all kinds of things. And I think what the city has done by requiring a lot of these mandatory inspections is that they've become a formality rather than a value add, right? It's something that's done for compliance or done to paper a file rather than to ask the question, well, what do we really need to do? And so that would be my advice, is to really look at, how to plan your work so that you can work your plan. And if you think about the planning process, and I'm sure, all these individuals will agree, the key to the first step, whether it's engineering or architecture or otherwise, is to discover all of the possible unknowns. Because if there's one thing that's true, in capital projects is if time is money and money is money, the biggest thing is surprises are money. In fact, surprises are 4 times the money, right? So I think the planning process, as well as being an expression of value, like what's important and how and what's it worth, but it's also a process to say, well, let's see if we can eliminate as many surprises as possible, because every surprise you discover in that process is a savings. It's money you can put right into your pocket, you know. And what are the surprises? Well, the budget's a surprise, right? Schedule's a surprise. You know, the one thing as an engineer I'm most concerned with existing buildings is hidden conditions. You know, you open something up and voila, it wasn't what you expected. You know, that kind of a surprise, and that takes time. It takes time and money invested up front to discover things, so you don't discover them when people are already under the gun and under a schedule to complete the work when you have the time to plan. Scope can be a surprise, right? Sometimes if you go through the process, you know, people don't communicate, you know, and there's options available and things like that. But you know, in general, I think the key to the planning process is really just eliminating surprises. And I can give you countless examples of the surprises that that catch you off guard and cause all kinds of, you know, money and time. We're in a building right now on Fifth Avenue, and they thought it was a steam pipe leak, and so they quickly opened up the apartment thinking that it was going to be just a quick fix to a steam line, and they realized that there's a 12-inch thick slab assembly with cinder fill and topping slabs, and it was under a setback, and all of a sudden, you know, the apartment really has to be evacuated for quite a long time, because what they did when they uncovered it is they compromised at the same time, because they didn't approach the project very slowly. And so what could have been a well-planned project now sort of became an emergency. So, you know, these are the kinds of things that, you know, if you sort of walk slowly in the planning process, you can walk even more quickly in the implementation side, and things, you know, will go much quickly at a time when it really matters the most, when it's going to save you the most amount of money.
To your point, Bill, you hit a lot of good points, and that's why it's so important. The planning stage, and along with the planning stage, you create your risk register, you create your constraint log, and really, you have to be realistic in the duration of the project, right? Everybody wants to, what I see, owners want to, they're constantly trying to push the envelope to expedite the project faster than it takes. And you tell them it's going to take X, and they said, no, we need it done at Y. And you know in your heart that it's never going to be achieved. And what happens is, what hurt now is with the COVID pandemic, you can always recover a schedule or expedite a schedule or crash a schedule, whatever you want to call it, by stacking the trades. Well, now with all the 6-foot social distancing, you no longer can stack the trades or expedite or crash a schedule, because now you have a separate set of circumstances that you have to deal with. So more so than ever now, the planning stage is going to be much more important. Not that it ever wasn't, but it really is going to have consequences that you know, unfortunately, owners will end up paying for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you know, on this the whole risk side, or the problems that we won't know about until we open up a wall, this is where I want to give a shout out to the building service workers who know the building inside and out, and as much as possible to involve them in the walkthroughs and in the questions, because that wall might have been opened 15 years ago and they were there, or they might have even been there when the building was built. If it was, say, a condominium built in the 80s or the 90s, they might have even been there. So, but the building service workers can add so much to the unforeseen problems that it's really important to to seek them out, have them be part of the walkthroughs, and it's by all means the resident manager, the superintendent, but the staff, the mechanical staff that might have been there for years and normally are not brought in on these kind of this kind of analysis. Before we end, Ari, I really want to hear from you about just the financing of all this, because when you have to find quick financing because of problems that come up and situations that you don't plan on. But next we're going to hear from Zaneta, and I know you have so many thoughts on this, but also to tie in some of the carbon footprint reduction projects that it's not only going to save money, because now the incentive isn't so much about saving money, it's about avoiding massive fines down the road. So I leave it to you, whatever your thoughts are.
Me or to Zaneta?
To Zaneta.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I was listening to everyone speak on this topic, and a few things was coming to my mind as we was going through it, which is obviously, the COVID, and as we look at the environment, it kind of looks like it's probably going to come back to, like, how do we plan for a round 2? Like, is there a way to plan for that? Is that a way to, put that in your budget? Is it a way to, is there risk, like as far as risk management when it, for those type of situations? The other is, we are getting caught up in the COVID and the social distancing regulations, and then it's like, are we paying attention to the laws that that are upon us that are going to that are going to cause fines that we still have to meet at the same time, which is as Margie just mentioned, our environmental laws like Local 97, because they have specific deadlines as of right now and they haven't been moved back. So therefore, like, are we scheduling and are we planning for that as well? Because, like, that's important, like, not to lose sight of what we have to do in order to prevent fines for your buildings. And as if you're in the trade for engineers or anyone that assesses energy or budgeting, like allowing and the co-op and condos, scheduling out and informing them what they have to do so that they don't incur fines, because regardless of whatever's going on, I mean, unless they change the deadlines, these things are still, something that's on their plate. So I feel like it's like dualistic. Like, we have to look at, like, both sides of what's going on, because or else, of course we know that they'll be looking at like a few $1 million of fines. Well, the first 20% of the buildings anyway that fall within that, law are gonna be looking at massive fines. So, it's just some questions I had for you guys. I was gonna ask you, anybody?
Well, if I might interject, okay. I think that's all very interesting, and the first thing you brought up was energy and COVID, and I think of a post I read just today from Cuomo, who said that the key to opening malls, as some regions in New York, not ours of course, is entering into phase 4, is to have proper ventilation, and an enhanced ventilation systems, and we've often found that many buildings in New York, if not most, have really are underventilated. They don't have enough ventilation. Well, in order to provide ventilation, you are increasing the energy usage of a building, which is many ways why you don't have it. So now there's going to be a pull where we're trying to go carbon neutral, but on the flip side, now we're going to be wanting to use more energy to increase the amount of fresh air and ventilation and heating and cooling that, and then trying to capture some of those lost energies just to comply. So, I suggest that just to show the complexities of trying to meet all of these new moving targets
at one time.
At one time. And many times it's a month before the violation. And New York City has been good recently about some of their amnesty programs and things like that, but they collect their violations. They'll do some things to work with you, but they definitely count on their violations, and they're staffing up. So it really just goes to, again, to prove the point, to try to get ahead of it, because the planning process is not, even an emergency is not going to be as simple as you would expect.
Yeah, and yeah, Bill, what you said about the staffing up, the violation writers, for want of another term, and so it's a combination of New York City and New York State. And guess what? Of course, their funds are depleted, so they are going to need the violation money more than they ever. So what, to forgive the violation money because of the virus and all this, that squeeze is going to come. So, will they reduce some violations? Perhaps, but we are talking about millions and millions of dollars of violations that once a building does not meet their carbon footprint requirement reduction, it's every year, and it's just going to get greater, where it tops out, for argument's sake, right now in 2030. So it's just going to keep increasing a little bit each year right now. And as they don't have the funds, they're going to be looking everywhere. So it's.
And so, and
yeah.
one thing is that, because those are going to be capital improvement projects, right? Because we're talking about retrofits, we're talking about, big systems, windows, lights. So, it's probably gonna have to be projected over like a few years in order to meet their goals. So these are things that they need to, it is complex, but like we have to figure out like how to meet both. And I guess I'm really bringing this subject up because of everyone that's on the panel, because we're dealing with Co-op and condos, with Jerry, and then we're also, Avi is doing, he's a CPA, he does accounting and budgeting, and then Bill, you deal with engineering, and Carmen, you do construction. So all of those things is like each of this, like this impacts each of those areas, and it's a great panel for understanding or like figuring out like where, like how do we go from there, because those like 2024, 25, they're going to start looking like, and so by 2028 you will start having funds. You have to start reporting, I believe it's at 2026. So we don't have a lot of time, and and then we're in the midst of COVID, and then you're in the midst of your other capital projects. So like that's just one of the concerns that I see that's is going to be a problem, because, and as Margie just said, because their funds are depleted, they're going to come after their funds, right? So, how do we navigate that? Because it's important.
Yes, yes. So, Avi, you have some thoughts here for us?
Well, if you know what you need to do, I think going back to Jerry's plan about the capital study is really an important part of it. Just to, you say it's 2025, 2026, and it's 5-6 years down the line from now. But like I think Bill said, you have other projects that are going on. So I think going back to that study, to get an engineer to do that work, or even do it internally. I know people get scared because you go with the engineer's going to ask, is going to be asking for an additional cost, which might not have in your budget. Just going through and even asking us as the accountants, let me see my depreciation schedule. I'm only new to the board. I've only been on for 3 years. What have we done the last 20, 30 years? We could pull up that if we've been the auditor for that long. That would be nice in and of itself. But if we have the detail, we can provide it to the board. I've done that with a couple of buildings, which is, why don't we just see what we did? When was the last time we did the roof? When was the last time we did these projects? And anything new that's coming up with the city, we could kind of, fit it in and say, listen, I know we have these city requirements, but I also know that there's a good chance, the last time we did the roof was 25 years ago, that's going to come up, and kind of, and plan for it, because that's the only way that they're going to be able to get, towards that goal. And if you just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and waiting and waiting and waiting, and another plan is, if a building's mortgage is up, if it's a co-op, their mortgage is up for refinancing in a couple of years, you could plan on that being your goal, and say, all right, listen, I know my mortgage is up. I refinanced in 2015. I have a 10-year maturity. 2025 is coming up. I'm gonna front load all my cash then and just take out a big loan. Obviously, we'll hope interest rates don't rise. We've been talking about this for the last couple of years, but that's another option as well. So, between allocating to reserves, between getting the study to understand what you need to allocate, assessments are always an option, and then potential refinancing, all those ways, and talking to your CPA or talking to the internal people at your management company, come up with that plan is really, that was my best recommendation for all this.
Avi, when I go into a restaurant, the first thing I ask is, what's that one thing that jumps off the page? And if somebody was to ask me what in our menu of services, I would have to say a reserve study, a capital reserve study, because you're going to get all of our experience on a roadmap for any building for, not a whole lot of money. And I know that sounds awfully self-serving, but I can't stress it enough because, Jerry had even mentioned that, there are certain guidelines, 5 to 10%, there's certain thresholds or whatever, and it's good to see what an average expenditure is over 10 years, and you have to roughly save that amount, going forward, plus escalation or whatever. But, to really plan out those projects, because sometimes those projects come up earlier than you expect. And
Right.
Sometimes there's some sleeping giants that we can help. There's, right now we're doing an awful lot of riser projects in these 100-year-old buildings. That wasn't spent 10 years ago.
Correct.
There's, fire alarm systems. We have a community room that we wanted to put a fire alarm in just for that community room for public assembly. And the fire department, despite what code says, you know what, you have to spend $1 million to put a fire alarm system in the whole building. Right. And that wasn't average in your last 10 years either. So again, I think a reserve study, reserve, funding plan, is a great way to really put your building in a good position. And I think it really helps, gentlemen like Jerry and Carmen and Avi to really do their work really well, because they have, really nobody has a crystal ball, but a reserve study is probably the closest thing.
Right, and I had a condo in Brooklyn that wanted to get the study done. They had it done. It went out for I think 10 or 15 years, and they calculated the estimated cost. They took a 15% uptick just for unknown expenditures. Came out to about I think like 1.5 or $2 million over the 10 years. And they put it in assessment, and they said, we're going to assess over the next 10 years that amount, and we'll do those projects piece by piece. And in that building, it didn't come out to be a large increase per unit owner, but on the one side, everyone there is getting in addition to basis to their unit. So any capital contributions they make to the condo or to their co-op can be an increase to the basis when they sell their unit down the road. And also you're not asking for a lot of money from people up front. And that's another way to do it. And the study was their guide, like you said, to give them that roadmap. And they didn't do everything. They're not planning to do everything that's there. But they've been chipping at it away each year. And it's actually impressive to see, what the planning does, and no one complains about it. It doesn't become a contentious thing at the board meetings, at the annual meetings. Everyone understands it's an older building. This is what needs to be done. And they keep it up to date. So I don't see enough of it in my practice, but it should be something that happens a little bit more.
Have you ever had a client complain that you over budgeted for something?
Very good. So Jerry, any final thoughts?
Yeah, based on what Avi just said, where they started assessing early, I think of the other saying that Bill might also have in his repertoire: inch by inch, it's a cinch; yard by yard, it's hard.
Good. Very good. Very good. So, Carmen, any final thoughts?
No, I think this was a good webinar, and I think I hope it serves the audience well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, William Payne. Thank you, Jerry Niemeier. Thank you, Avi Zanjirian. Thank you, Carmen Rainieri. Thank you, Zaneta Williams, and thank you, Christina Marcus. And thank you, Danny Grossarth, for keeping us on track here. Thank you all. And
Thank you, Margie.
can't wait for part 2. You're welcome.
Thank you,
Good
Margie.
night.
Thank you.
Good night.